chapter 2. And if you just want to follow along on the screen, you certainly can do that. While you're doing that, I want to let you know that we have flags of different countries. We have the globe. We have this emphasis on the world because this is a morning in which we are going to celebrate what God is doing around the world. And after the service, I'm going to pray the prayer of benediction and by faith pray over the food that will be awaiting us in the back. We may not see it, but we can smell it. And that's partial faith, I would say. So we will pray for that food, and everybody is welcome to come. I know there will be enough food. We brought enough enchiladas to feed 2 tablefuls. So and Tammy's enchiladas rock the world. Amen. Those who have been part of our small group know what they mean by that. So please, just stay with us, enjoy the time. We're going to have someone share about what God's doing in El Salvador, and it's just going to be a blast. What we'll do is we'll pray, and then we'll just work our way back to the tables. Please be seated, and then we'll be dismissed by tables and give you a chance to talk to one another. I want to encourage you to sit with people that you don't normally sit with. And how about a good icebreaker question could be something like this. Hey, speaking of the world, how many have traveled outside the United States? If so, where have you been? That sort of thing. And just see what happens. If it's been some kind of a volunteering situation, talk about that. It could be a lot of fun just getting to know people that way. Also after the service, it's the third and last members gatherings, and that's going to meet in the youth room with the red couches. A lot of you have come. Thank you. We've been getting great feedback, great prayer. I believe our prayer is more targeted because of the conversations that we are having. And so what we'll do is I promise that we won't keep you too long, and just come to that room. We're going to ask some questions and share a little bit of information, and then we'll get out to a table and grab some food, and it'll be a lot of fun. So just want you to do that. Kids, you should have a listening sheet, and I'm going to include you in the service. There are 3 words that I want you to listen for in addition to the words that are on your listening sheet. One is the word kindness. Kindness. God is kind, and He can help us to be kind. The second and the third word are a little tougher. You might just have to put the first letter. The first is the word optimist. The second is the word pessimist. Optimist and pessimist. You can put an O for optimist, P for pessimist. As I get started, before I read, can I ask somebody to give me a definition of someone who is a optimist? Someone just shout it out. Yeah. If a glass has water, 50%, they would say the glass is half full. Why? What's an optimist do? They see the best. They see good is going to happen, right? Now, what is a pessimist? If you're using the glass, instead of saying the glass is half full, they would say the glass is half what? Empty. Is this going to turn out good? A pessimist would say? Probably not, most likely. Anybody familiar with Winnie the Pooh? Anybody know who is the pessimist in Winnie the Pooh? Eeyore. I don't know, is there an optimist in Winnie the Pooh? Is Tigger? Yeah, I'd say Tigger's. He's a good optimist. All right. Well, there's a story that's old as the hills, and it's a story about some researchers who were setting up an experiment involving 2 twin boys. 2 twin boys. One of the boys was very optimistic. One of the boys was very, very pessimistic. And so they took this pessimistic boy into a room, and the room was filled with toys. Every kind of toy, electronics or artistic or whatever kind of toy you enjoy, that toy was most likely in the room. Any kid that age would have loved it. And you can guess what the pessimistic kid did. He looked at all these shiny toys and he said, oh, well, that one's kind of old, or, well, this is missing, this isn't there. This kid was so pessimistic that if you said the glass was half empty, he would say, no, it's completely empty. That was this kid. Then they took the optimistic boy into another room, opened up the door, and this this smell just kind of hit you in the face. The room was filled with poop or manure. And the kid looked at all that manure, and he was like, all right. And he dove right into the pile of manure. And he started grabbing it and throwing it and digging. And he just had the most excited look on his face. Now, the researchers knew he was optimistic, but they were very surprised at how optimistic this kid was. And so they couldn't help themselves. Why are you so excited about all this poo? He said, with this much poo, there's got to be a pony in here somewhere. So I want to ask you this question. How do you look at life? How do you look at life? This is for the kids. This is for the adults. This is for all of us. Are you a person, when you look at your life, you look at life around you, do you just kind of naturally gravitate towards what's missing? Or something that could be better? Or are you someone that looks for that pony? Looks for the pony. We're going to look at this woman, Naomi, that we started a couple weeks ago as we go through Ruth. And we're going to look that now good things are kind of starting to happen in her life. And that's why the question is, dare I hope again? Is hope is beginning to rise within her. Now, if you're like me sometimes, some of you understand that, it's kind of hard to get my hopes up because in my life I've experienced loss or I've experienced disappointment. I've gotten my hopes up before and they've been dashed. I've had setbacks in the past. I mean, Doug, I could write a pretty decent country song based on what I've experienced. And maybe, I don't mean to make light of your life, but maybe you're like, yeah, if you were to ask me, are you an optimistic person? Do you have hope? You may say, probably not as much as I should. If that's you, then this is what we're going to talk about this morning. So, in the last time we gathered, we looked at chapter 1, and this is a story of Naomi. She experienced horrible, horrible tragedy. It started off with some economic hardship, and her family had to move to another country called Moab. And, she was moving to a new place. She was kind of a stranger, a foreigner, but she had her husband, she had her 2 sons. And then her husband died. And then, in a span of 10 years, both of her sons died. And she returned back to Bethlehem with her daughter-in-law, Ruth. And when they said, hey, Naomi's back, is that you, Naomi? She said, don't call me Naomi, call me Mara. Mara means bitter. I am bitter. God's been bitter to me. I'm bitter at God. She said, literally, God has raised his fist against me. And she basically said, he's raised his fist against me. I'm raising my fist against him. I'm mad. I'm not happy. I'm grieving. And that's the state of Naomi at the end of chapter 1. But as it ends, there's this phrase. It was the beginning of the barley harvest. The writer of Ruth put this phrase in there as this beautiful foreshadowing of, okay, things are pretty bleak, things are pretty dark. But the harvest is beginning. Hope is beginning to rise. And so I'm going to read the whole chapter. Chapter 2 won't take but maybe 3 minutes. And I want us to be familiar with what's going to happen. It's a long chapter, so I won't ask you to stand this time. But I'm just going to begin at verse 1. Now there was a wealthy and influential man in Bethlehem named Boaz, who was a relative of Naomi's husband, Elimelech. One day, Ruth, the Moabite, said to Naomi, let me go out in the harvest fields and pick up the stalks of grain left behind by anyone who is kind enough to let me do it. Naomi replied, all right, my daughter, go ahead. And so Ruth went out to gather grain behind the harvesters. As it happened, she found herself working in the field that belonged to Boaz. Just kind of happened that way. Coincidence, huh? He was a relative of her father-in-law, Elimelech. While she was there, Boaz arrived from Bethlehem, and he greeted the harvesters. "The Lord be with you," and "The Lord bless you," the harvesters replied. And then Boaz asked his foreman, "Who's the young woman over there? Who does she belong to?" The foreman replied, "She is the young woman from Moab who came back with Naomi. She asked this morning if she could gather grain behind the harvesters. She has been hard at work ever since, except for a few minutes' rest in the shelter." Boaz went over and said to Ruth, "Listen, my daughter, stay right here with us when you gather grain. Don't go to any other fields. Stay right behind the young women working in the field. See which part of the field they have harvested, and then follow them. I have warned the young men not to treat you roughly. And then, when you are thirsty, help yourself to the water they have drawn from the well." Ruth fell at his feet and thanked him warmly. "What have I done to deserve such kindness?" she asked. "I'm only a foreigner." "Yeah, I know," he replied, "but I also know about everything you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband." Bethlehem's a small town. Ever grow up in a small town? Everyone knows what everybody had for breakfast? Well, good news travels fast in small towns, apparently. "I have heard how you have left your father and your mother and your own land to live here among complete strangers. May the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge, reward you fully for what you have done." He blesses her. I hope to continue to please you, sir," she replied. "You have comforted me by speaking so kindly to me, even though I'm not one of your workers." Well, at mealtime, Boaz, he called to her, "Come over here and help yourself to some food. You can dip your bread in the sour wine." So she sat with the harvesters, and Boaz gave her some roasted grain to eat. And she ate all she wanted, and she had some left over. I could preach about a lot of things in this passage, so you're just going to have to catch some of that. When Ruth went back to work again, Boaz ordered his young men to let her gather grain right among the sheaves without stopping her, and pull out some of the heads of barley from the bundles and drop them on purpose for her. Let her pick them up, and don't give her a hard time. And so Ruth, she gathered barley all day, and when she beat out the grain that evening, she filled an entire basket. Some say a bushel. Some would even say it's like a garbage can full of grain. She carried it back or lugged it back to town, and she showed it to her mother-in-law, Ruth, who gave her the roasted grain that was left over from her meal. "Where did you get all this grain today? Where did you gather this grain today? Where did you work? May the Lord bless the one who helped you." She's stunned. And so Ruth told her mother-in-law about the man whose field she worked. She said, "The man I worked with today, his name's Boaz. May the Lord bless him," she told her daughter-in-law. "He is showing his kindness to us as well as your dead husband. That man is one of our closest relatives, one of our family redeemers." Redeemers. Sang about that earlier. Then Ruth said, "What's more, Boaz even told me to come and stay with his harvesters until the entire harvest is completed." Good. "Do as he said, my daughter. Stay with his young women right through the whole harvest. You might be harassed in other fields, and you'd be safe with him." And so Ruth worked alongside the women in Boaz's field and gathered grain with them until the end of the barley harvest. Then she continued working with them through the wheat harvest in early summer, and all the while she lived with her mother-in-law. Let me just hit some of the highlights of this. First paragraph, the first 3 verses, we find where Naomi and Ruth, they found a place to stay. And Ruth gets up and we need some food. And so Ruth asks Naomi if it's okay. "Hey, can I go into one of the fields and gather some food for our needs?" Now, the way welfare worked back then was that impoverished people were allowed to do what is called gleaning from fields. What that means is that they could work the owners of the fields did not harvest on the edge of their fields, and people were allowed to follow the harvesters to pick up any stray stalks of grain that might have dropped. It's called gleaning. And so basically people who didn't have money could work in the fields and they can get food to eat from the leftovers. This is something that I find impressive about Ruth. Chapter 1, I'm impressed with her loyalty and her devotion to Naomi, who's hurting and bitter and mad. And I mean, she was a dark cloud. But she said, I'm going to stay with you through thick and thin. I'm going to care for you. Now, she's a woman who just rolls up her sleeves and says, okay, we got to take care of business. I need to provide for Naomi. We need to provide for her needs. So she rolls up her sleeves and she says, I'm going to go to work. I'm going to find a job. Awesome, awesome lady. And so verse 3 says, she just happened to roll into Boaz's field. And obviously the Bible is kind of tongue-in-cheek there. Because as the story unfolds, it's obvious that this was not a coincidence. This was a God incidence, not a coincidence. In fact, that's a good question to ask a coworker to get a spiritual conversation started. Is, hey man, I'm thinking a little bit. Do you believe in coincidences? And just see what they say. And you can say, hey, I heard something yesterday at church, and it was pretty interesting about this, is that he said that God is always working behind the scenes. There are no coincidences. There are God incidences. And now we're talking about a doctrine that's really important for a pessimist to understand. It is the doctrine of providence. Providence. This comes from the root word to provide. It's this idea of seeing ahead and providing for the needs along the way. As a follower of God, as a follower of Christ, by faith, we believe that God, through his wisdom and through his love, he cares for and he directs the affairs of the whole universe, and he gets down to the very nitty-gritty details of all of our lives, especially those who fear God, those who place their trust in him. And according to his good purposes, he works out his plans, and providence is played out. And there's stories of these, it just so happened in the Bible, and you see the hand of providence. In the book of Exodus, Moses was born during a very dangerous time in Egypt. Little boys were being killed because of the Pharaoh's evil heart. And his mom and his dad, they feared and they trusted God. And they believed that Moses was a very special baby. And they created this little basket of reeds, and they put tar and pitch on it. And they put this little baby in this basket, and they stuck him in these reeds by the river. And by faith, they walked away from that child. Must have been gut-wrenching for the mom. And it just so happens that Pharaoh's daughter was nearby bathing. And she heard the cries of this little child, and she felt compassion in her heart towards this little Hebrew baby. And it just so happens that Moses' mom was asked to take care of that child by that same woman. It just happened. It was a coincidence. Not. It was a God incident. And for those of us who battle with pessimism, we need to understand what providence is all about, how God is taking things, he's moving and he's directing things according to his good pleasures. And so Moses was spared. He was trained up in the ways of leadership by the very government that tried to kill him. And simply put, providence means where God guides, he provides. And if you're a person that believes in providence, that should be a model that you should have on your refrigerator this week. Where God guides, he provides. If I trust God, if I fear God, he delights in every little detail. The Bible says that he directs the steps of the godly because he is a God of providence. Romans 8:28 says, and we know that all things work for God's good, for the good of those who love him and have been called according to what? His purposes. Not my purposes, not my plans for my life, God's plans, God's purposes. I commit myself to His ways. And He promises through the hand of this beautiful thing called providence, He will guide, He will provide, He will take care of you. Some of you, you need to take that to your heart because you're doubting right now. You're doubting God. You have pessimism in your heart. And God wants to change that. He wants to cleanse that and give you a spirit of optimism, a holy optimism. So you can say, oh man, there's a bunch of poo everywhere, but there's a pony in here somewhere because my God is a God of providence. He guides, He provides. I'm only 1/3 through. Take my pulse. Yep, I'm good. All right, so verses 4 through 13. Boaz knows this girl working in the field, and he shows her this beautiful kindness. In verses 11 through 12, we are told that Boaz is not only impressed with her work ethic, but her compassion and her commitment to Naomi. He says, ma'am, I'm so impressed with how you left your mom and your dad. You traveled to a strange land. You're living in a foreign country. You're living from hand to mouth in poverty just so you could take care of this grumpy old lady. Wow, what a woman. Because word got around town. Stay away from Naomi. Give her a wide berth. This woman is bitter and mad at God. Well, after receiving Boaz's compliment and blessing, she simply replies, I hope I can continue to please you, sir. What a humble, loving, hard-working woman who desires to do good. Ladies, I'm going to give you a challenge. I dare you to spend 20 minutes reading the book of Ruth and underlining, circling, or putting a little check mark next to every incident of Ruth's character coming out, where you see who this woman is, rain or shine. And get together with another lady or a couple other ladies, meet at some coffee shop or whatever, and just talk about what you saw and how that blessed you, how that challenged you, and build one another up in the word from this woman's life, because she is a role model. You don't need to look at TV and all these different types of women role models. Here's one right in front of your eyes. She's awesome. She rocks. Now we see what kind of a man Boaz is. He shows her kindness. He is generous towards her. Guys, pay attention. He invites her to lunch to eat roasted grain with the workers. This is a beautiful example of this spirit of integration that's in the Old Testament that God desires, and in the New Testament, and what we desire for our church here at Sanctuary. It's a spirit of integration. Boaz invites all different kinds of people to sit down. Doesn't matter your social standards. He's rich. These folks are just, blue-collar, hardworking people. There's economic differences. There's racial differences. There's social standing differences. It don't matter. They're all having a meal together. They're having a meal together. And that's what we desire as a church. We want to have times where we can eat together and we can just mingle and get to know one another, no matter what our backgrounds might be, and just delight and enjoy. And so later Boaz protects Ruth from getting hassled by the other workmen. He tells the workmen to purposely drop heads of barley so she could pick it up. He's basically loading her up and blessing her. And next week I'm going to zero in on Boaz. And guys, I think you're going to be inspired and challenged by this man. Well, now we're in the home stretch. So after working all day, Ruth heads back home, and she's got an entire basket full of grain. She might be lugging a 50-gallon, trash can with her. I don't know how much, but it's a lot. It's a lot of grain. And she brings this home. She also pulls out the doggy bag with roasted grain for Naomi. And to put it simply, Naomi is stunned. She's stunned. She could not believe it. She asks, where did you gather all this food? Where did you work? And then these words came out of her mouth. May the Lord bless the one who helped you. Whoops, it slipped out. She's supposed to be mad at God, remember? Also, it came out. May the Lord bless the one who did this. So Ruth tells her the whole story. Went to this guy named Boaz's field. He showed kindness to me. I had a great lunch. He took care of me. He offered me kind words. He gave me protection. The whole 9 yards. And so verse 20, here's this. Hear this. This is good. She says this, and may the Lord bless him. Oh, it slipped out again. He is showing his kindness to us. Kindness. as well to your dead husband, as well to your dead husband. This man is one of our closest relatives, one of our family redeemers. Keyword, kindness, family redeemer. See, Ruth, she didn't know anything about Jewish culture. She didn't know about the Old Testament law. She didn't know how God had set things up and how he wanted his nation and society to operate. But there was this thing called family redeemers or family protectors. It makes sense when you think about it. I mean, it was a pretty rough country. It was the time of the judges, a lot of chaos. But in Leviticus, God established that men were commanded to take care of family. Take care of their relatives in trouble. Rescue them if they're in physical danger. Buy back their property if they lost it because of economic hardship. The closer the relationship, the greater the responsibility. The same idea is in the New Testament. The Bible says, men, if you do not take care of members of your own family, you're worse than an unbeliever. The idea is men take care of family. God defines a man by being a protector and someone who provides, a redeemer. And so Boaz, he had money. He's showing family love. He's showing loyalty to these ladies. And so then Ruth adds more good news. Poor Naomi. I mean, she's so mad and bitter, she couldn't handle all this good news, but she's getting more. She says, what's more, Boaz even told me to come back and stay with his harvesters until the entire harvest is completed. Barley harvest is in the spring. Wheat harvest starts in early summer. Ruth left home that day, like 14 hours earlier. She went to try to find some food. She comes back home with a garbage can full of grain. She has a job, and a fresh wind of hope is blowing through that little shack that they're staying in. Hope is on the rise. God's invisible hand of providence is at work. So let's get back to the original question. Are you a pessimist? You may say, no, I'm a realist, man. Okay, whatever. But when you look at things in your life right now, are there certain things where you cannot be described as optimistic? You basically don't see hope. You're kind of more like Eeyore. Oh, nothing ever good happens in this area of my life. Or, that kind of a thing. Now, I'm talking about this because I have been nailed by this one. I've been nailed by this one. How do you look at life? If you gravitate to the downside, if you are afraid to expect good from God, your thinking is all jacked up, and you need to make a change. You need to think. You need to change how you think. God wants you to change how you think. It is amazing how your life will change when God changes your expectations of life. Your attitude will determine your altitude. Holy smokes, it might even bring a smile to your face. Man, we used to get hammered by my old pastor. He looked at us and go, some of you guys, you look like you've been weaned on a dill pickle. As a kid, I didn't know what that meant, but I kind of get it now. It meant that we're all frowny and dumpy looking. It's like, man, we're here to worship. We're here to celebrate who God is. And we're all, it's like, wow. So in verse 20, Naomi uses this word, hesed, H-E-S-E-D, hesed. Kids, can you say hesed with me? Hesed. Yep. Hesed means loving kindness. Loving kindness. She used this word to describe what Boaz was doing. It's a special word that describes a loyalty, a faithfulness over time based on the fact that the person is good. They have a good character. And it don't matter what the circumstances are. They're always going to be kind. They're going through waves of the ocean, and these waves are up and down. Can you picture all these waves going up and down? Can you see it? And there's this big ship of kindness with USS Hesed on the back. And it's just plowing through those waves because it's big, it's mighty, it's strong. It's not going up and down. It's plowing through it. That is the word that describes one of the characteristics, one of the core characteristics of our God. It's Hesed. He is kind. He is loyal. Earlier, Naomi declared that God was against her. He raised his fist against me. But now she is seeing the hesed of God. She's seeing his loving, loyal kindness. And she can't help let it slip out. May the Lord bless. May the Lord bless. Of course, because that's what the Lord is. He blesses. He's good. She's getting a glimpse of our God. Are you getting a glimpse of our God this morning? I hope so. God has guided Ruth to Boaz's field. God's providing food, and the kindness of a generous man. God has led them to a redeemer, a rescuer, one who has the ability to raise our hopes. And when we go to the New Testament, Jesus is the ultimate redeemer. People are looking for hope in this world. They're hoping that this relationship, they're hoping that this situation, they're hoping, and they might even be optimistic, but then the world hits and it's up and down and it's up and down. And what we need is a big, stinking boat, a redeemer boat that can plow through that, one in which we can be a part of, that provides stability and a realistic optimism, a holy optimism, so that no matter what, even if it looks like we're in a room full of poo, we can still get excited because there is a blessing in here somewhere. So as you look at your life, you need to look at your life through the lenses of who God is, what he has done, what God has promised to do. God is so good. You can expect good from a God who is good. As you look at your life right now, I'm guessing you have some uncertainties. I'm guessing that there's some things that you're just wondering, I don't know how this can turn out good, Doug. And if you told me the whole story, I'd go, yep, I'm right there with you. I don't know. But that's above my pay grade. That's God's department. He's the one that's got the hand of providence. My hand is like this. My pinky hurts. I got like little arthritis in my knuckles now. Sharing my aches and pains as I get older. I'm 49 now. I just turned 49. This is not a good hand. It's weak. The hand of man is weak. But the hand of God, the hand of providence, is strong. And so what you need to do is whatever pessimism you have, and if your hope is, imagine a scale, and your hope is like up here because the pessimism and the outlook and the questions and the doubts are all, and all you're focusing on is how it's empty. Empty. This is missing. This should be better. It's just basically a pessimistic outlook, isn't it? And hope is like, there's no counterweight whatsoever. I'm going to give you the counterweight this morning. I want to show you who our God is. I want to remind you who our God is and what he has promised. And either it's true, either he's trustworthy, or it's a bunch of craziness. It's not true. Psalm 112, verse 4. The godly, those who fear God, they do not fear bad news. They continually to trust the Lord to care for him. See, those who entrust themselves to a God who is good, they don't freak out with bad news. I don't like bad news, especially on Monday mornings, because I get lots of bad news on Monday morning. And then I just kind of like, I have this reaction. I'm like, well, wait a second. Is God God? Can he care for this or not? Is it really up to me, ultimately? Or is God going to take care of it? Isaiah 30, verse 18, the Lord is a faithful God. Blessed are those who wait for his help. We can wait on God because he's saying, I got something good. There's a pony. Romans 8:31, what shall we say about such wonderful things as these? If God is for us, who can ever be against us? God and myself against, that's a pretty good team. I mean, I used to play pickup games of basketball, and I have a good player on my team, and I'm like, hey, two of us, we can take these three guys because I got this guy here. He's really good. Well, I got God. You can have God on your team. If God's for you, man, who's going to be against you? Hebrews 13:5. This is powerful. Think about this. God has declared, never will I leave you. Never will I forsake you. Let's say it together. Never, never, never will I forsake you. God has promised, if you place your life and your trust in him, he says, I will never leave you. I will never forsake you. Isn't that awesome? Oh, that's so good. Romans 15, verse 13. This is the best one. I'm committing this one to memory this week. I challenge you. Commit it to memory. Do it. I pray that God, the source of hope, will fill you completely with joy and peace. Could anybody use joy and peace? You want to be filled completely? God says he is the source of all hope. Why? Because you trust in him. Then you will overflow. You're not going to only be filled, but you're going to overflow with confident hope through the power of the Holy Spirit. Good news, friends. Good news. Fact. Our God reigns. Fact. He is good. Fact. He does good. Your response. What does God want me to do? Well, if you are a follower of God or you want to be a follower of God, your response is to trust in what he has promised about himself. You will trust in him and you will wait upon him if he asks you to. Because you know that the hand of providence is at work, and you got your own individual stories, and our stories are all kind of coming together as we gather as a corporate body. But we're part of God's greater story. Naomi and Ruth and Boaz, they had all their stories, their individual stories, but they came together in this story, which as we see the hand of providence at work, it's part of God's greater story. What am I getting at? That we have hope, we can have optimism, and it's for a reason. I know optimistic people who say, well, it's just going to turn out okay. Well, what are you basing that hope on? Oh, it just always does. It will. It will. Okay, well, maybe it will, but there's no reason. It's almost like superstition. But we have all of history, we have archaeology, we have the Old Testament, we have the New Testament, we have story after story after story of God's provision and God's leadership. And so I want you to think about where in your life right now you have a pessimistic spirit. In this area, you don't have a holy optimism. You're just like Eeyore. Is anybody with me here? Do you have at least one? Okay. What do? Ask God to forgive you. Ask God to forgive you. If you are a follower of Christ and you believe that somehow God is not going to do good in this area, that is an insult to the character of God. If you allow that kind of spirit to mull around in your mind and in your heart, you're basically saying, God, I love you, but I don't trust you. If a husband said that to his wife, I love you, honey, but I don't trust you, that's crazy, isn't it? So repent. Ask God to forgive you. Then, ask God to help you. Ask him to rescue you. You need a redeemer. You need a family redeemer like Boaz. You need the Lord Jesus Christ to rescue you, and he will raise your hopes because you can't do it without him. And then finally, thank God. Thank God that he's a God that guides and provides. And so as we prepare to take communion, we're reminded of God's kindness because he gave his only begotten Son, his one and only Son, to pay the sins that you and I committed against him. We offended him. And even our own pessimism against his holy nature and his glory, that is a sin. He is so holy. He is so pure. But God in his mercy has offered you and myself a full pardon. He has offered his abiding peace. And he has given us his provision. Every day he says, I will never leave you. I will never forsake you. Now, you might be having a problem. I don't like the asking for forgiveness part. You need to. You don't understand as much now, but when you grow in your faith, you'll understand just how offensive it is against God. And as great as the offense, even greater is the offering. And so if it's in your heart, you would like to kind of pray a prayer of dedication and ask God to guide you and to provide for your life, I'm going to pray a prayer. It's more for me. But if you would like to pray this prayer with me, maybe it's the first time you've ever even talked to God. Or maybe it's just something you need to do right now because you realize, man, he is killing me this morning. Well, I've been squirming all week long, so join the club. He is holy, he is good, he is kind, he is wonderful. But I'm going to pray this prayer out loud. It's my prayer, kind of. But if you'd like to join with me, I'm going to do it like a wedding. I'm just going to say a few lines, and you repeat after me. And we're just going to pray this prayer together if this is something that's in your heart. It's basically a prayer of consecration. I'm giving myself to God's care, to God's control, to surrender myself to him. Dear Lord, I believe that you are good. You do good. And you are taking me somewhere good. Though I don't understand, in faith I will wait on you. I will worship you. And I will expect good to come from you. Because you are good. Amen. Well, as the worship team comes forward,